Page 68, Scheherazade, a very famous melody. I would encourage you to go listen to the orchestra performances of this. It's gorgeous. Fingering wise, I like the fingering they have. I wouldn't change the fingering. The right hand fingering is fine exactly the way it is. I have one minor suggestion in the left hand fingering, and that is the third line down on page 68. It's the second measure. You see, on the first measure you have an A and a C sharp as 4-2. They're saying do it again on the next one. I suggest you do a 4-1 and connect it, do a finger legato on that to connect those there. That happens again later on, same fingering, and that's the only fingering I would change. The key in this is actually E minor. This is a minor key. It's got one sharp, F sharps, but it's got a bunch of accidentals, all right? Just be careful with the accidentals. Let's just take a look real quick at the top of page 69 on those eighth notes. You get them on the next line, but it's the same exact thing. So just look at the top of the line. You're coming off a G from the previous page, and then for the eighth notes, you have an A flat, B flat, cross the thumb under for the C, and that puts you in position for most of them. F natural, crossover. It's pretty, not too terribly bad. The eighth notes at the bottom of the page hopefully are not a problem, except you're having to work your fourth and fifth fingers, which is good, you should. So you're here, your fourth finger's on the D. This is the last two measures of the last line on page 69. Eighth notes. So I like that fingering. I would use that. I recommend it. Don't shy away from using your fourth and fifth fingers. You know, they're awkward, so they need to be used a little more to get them used to this. The only other thing I would add is I like to hear the phrasing. So just do a little lift and drop between each phrase. There on page 68, the first line, last measure. You're here, and then the last measure, the two quarter notes is a new phrase, but you got to lift your hand up for the fourth finger to get the second finger on it. So this works out great because the time it takes you to do that gives you that break in the sound, right? And you're saying, what difference does it make? The pedal's down. Well, hang on there. I'll talk about the pedal in a minute. So again, the end of the second line, you're here, lift up before you do those two quarter notes. So we get a break in the sound here, and all over, wherever it is, just I would like to hear a break in between the phrasing. Now let's talk about the pedaling. I disagree with their pedaling. You pedal it this way if you want to, exactly what they're telling you to do. I recommend nothing. I do not recommend this pedaling. They have simplified it a great deal to help you out. Well, I don't. If you're going to use the pedal, do it right or don't use the pedal, as far as I'm concerned. Most cases. So I'm going to change it all over the place. You can take a pencil and mark it in if you want, or you can ignore it. It's up to you, of course. Starting out on page 68 in the first line. Put the pedal down right when they tell you to. It's right after you play the notes and the next to the last measure. Then in the last measure, you play the first beat. And right after you play the first beat, I recommend you lift the pedal up with the right hand, because the right hand has a break in the phrase. Okay, so you're here. So when you lift the right hand up, lift the pedal up. So we get you don't need the pedal for those quarter notes. They can be by themselves. Now, for the second line, I don't like all those eighth notes blurry like that. You know, it's like that. So what I recommend is you pedal the third beat only, and all we're doing here is connecting the left hand. We want to connect the chords. These chords, we don't want any silence between them. So in order to do that, we use the pedal to help us out, which means right at the end of the measure, I said third beat, you could do it on the last eighth note. Works even better, because we don't want to blur the eighth notes. So right at the end, you push it down, 2, 3, And then lift it up right after you play the next chord, because we don't want to blur the eighth notes. So to demonstrate the second line on the eighth notes, it's here. That way we're connecting the left hand, but the eighth notes are not all gushy. Ugh. Then at the end of the second line, lift the pedal up with the right hand at the end of the phrase, right? Because you're here. 1, 2, 3, 1. Be careful. Last measure, second line, the left hand's playing an E as part of the chord. But on the next beat, the right hand needs that note, the key. So make sure your left hand is off of it soon enough for the right hand to get there, or you'll be trampling on each other. I would lift the left hand with the right hand here. So we get a complete silence, okay? Now in the third line, I would not pedal those first two measures at all, because you can connect the chords pretty much. Then in the third measure, put it down after you play the notes. Then in the left hand, you're playing the first beat. Lift the pedal up with the hands so you get a break between the phrases. Now to simplify this a little bit, if you look at the last measure of each of the lines on page 68, and play them all the same pedal-wise, you have 3 quarter notes basically, okay? And looking at the first measure, here the pedal is down. I would lift, and you have it, no, lift the pedal up with the hands at the end of the phrase. Okay, so we have just a bit of silence, complete silence before you start the next phrase. The last 2 measures of the first line is this way. 1, 2, 3, 1. And then leave it up. You don't need it going on until I told you. Same thing in the second line. You're here. 1, 2, 3, 1. Okay. Third line, same thing. You're here. 1, 2, 3, 1. Last line, you're here. 1, 2, 3, 1. Like so. Page 69, second line, first measure, same thing. 1. Third line, second measure, same thing. Fourth line, second measure, same thing. Just lift the pedal up with the end of the phrase, and the rest of the measure doesn't need pedal. Now when you get to the fourth line, again, I would do that like the second line on page 68. You don't need pedal on those except to connect the left hand. Now you have a page turn. Now when we play it together, we're going to stop at the end of page 69. We're going to turn the page, and I'm going to count us in again, and we're going to play page 70. But if you're performing this, you have to keep the beat going. You can't stop. So in that case, you might have to leave the pedal down on the last measure on page 69 so you don't lose the chord in the left hand, and then use the left hand to turn the page while you're playing the eighth notes in the right hand. Yeah, good luck with all that, but with a little practice, you'll be able to do that. When you turn the page, and then you can go on. So there you have to leave the pedal down. On page 70, I'm recommending the same pedaling style at the end of each phrase. You get it on the first 3 lines and second measure. You see it there? Also, I'm recommending that you use the pedal on the last beat of the measures to connect the chords in the left hand for the second and third lines. You don't need it in the first line because, again, you can change the fingering. For the last 2 measures of the first line, it's the 4-2 and then a 4-1. You can connect it with the fingers. You don't need the pedal. And if you really think you do, you can put the pedal down in the last beat of each measure just to connect the left hand. All right. But in the second line and third line, you need the pedal on the last beat. 1, 2, 3. All we're doing is using the pedal to connect the left hand chords. That's the only reason it's being used there. Then at the end, of course, the hands and the pedal all come up at the same time, as usual. All right, let's try this out and see what happens. There is a 2-beat pickup at the beginning. So I'm going to give us 4 counts, a full 3 for 3/4 time, and then 1 for beat 1. And we come in on beat 2. So go ahead and put your hands where they go. Right hand here, left hand here, foot's on the pedal. 2, 3, go. 1, 2, 3, 1. 2, 3, 1. 2, 3, 1. 2, 3, 1. 2, 3, 1. 2, 3, 1. 2, 3, 1. Stop. Turn the page. Hands where they go. 4th finger on the B. Right left hand. Okay, foot's on the pedal. Push the pedal down right after you play these notes, right? Okay. 1, ready, go.